28 weeks later. Right gear, wrong apocalypse. I would call 28 Weeks Later the sequel to the adored 28 Days Later, a fun horror movie. I think it barely qualifies as a horror movie, as the only horrific thing in it is the lack of communication between units, but that denominator is good enough for the purposes of this video. The movie isn't as good as its big brother. Let's be honest about that. It has fewer zombies, virtually nothing is at stake, and despite the firepower in the movie, the action scenes have a lot to be desired. The movie, as you might have concluded from its name, begins 28 weeks after the events of its prequel. At this point, all of the infected have died from starvation, and a US-led NATO force, which is really just the American army, occupies the UK to clean it up and repopulate it. Faced with a never-before-seen threat, the Americans are armed to the teeth, but they still manage to lose control and break containment, releasing the virus to the rest of the world. Despite their cutting-edge firepower, they still lose to an almost eradicated rage virus. Let's talk about why. Unlike 28 Days Later, where we only get to see 3 firearms, 28 Weeks Later comes with a whole armory. Starting off with the M4A1, this is the most common gun in the movie. The fully automatic variant of the M4 carbine entered service in 1994, and you can see it in the hands of the vast majority of soldiers in the movie. The NATO standard 5.56x45 carbine has an effective range of about 500 meters, a rate of fire of about 700 to 950 rounds per minute, and 30-round magazines, making it ideal for urban combat. Where this gun really excels though, and this is something that we see a lot of in the movie, is modding. Most of the M4s in the movie are fitted with Aimpoint's Comp M2 red dot sight, designated in the military as the M68 close combat optic. Most soldiers also have Trigicon's ACOG scopes on top of that, as well as foregrips, flashlights, and infrared designators, which we never see them use. One of this movie's great accomplishments is the fact that we get to see Hawkeye do Hawkeye things before he becomes Hawkeye, and the fact that he's special is also obvious when you take a look at his M4. His carbine is different from all the rest, as he has a holographic sight, an NVG sight for night combat, and the front post sight replaced with a low-profile gas block. So this is Doyle's M4, and this is the M4 of a soldier who didn't get preferential treatment by the writers. Although loadouts do differ from one person to another depending on their duties within a unit, it's unrealistic that an NCO would have a highly kitted out M4 while the majority of his platoon walks around with nothing but a red dot sight. Speaking of sights, points will absolutely be deducted for their misuse. For one, Doyle uses his night vision sight during the day during the park extraction scene. Secondly, and this mistake is on the production, not Doyle, there's no holographic reticle when he takes aim. The movie shows us that this is how Doyle sees the world through his optics, but we can clearly see that the holographic sights are on all the time. Therefore, we should also see a small reticle, similar to this one, in front of his optics. Doyle's scope is a bit off, by the way. His shots are off from the center, but the rounds hitting high left and high right from the center of the reticle allows the viewer to actually see them hit. Unrelated to the M4s, but the soldiers in this movie are wearing wrong NBC gear, specifically the gas masks. We see them wearing M17A1 gas masks, which were replaced with the M40 gas mask in the early 2000s. Moving on to the second most important weapon in the movie, and that's the M21 sniper weapon system. Only it's not the actual SWS, it's a Springfield M1A modified to look like the SWS. The reason why the production decided to go for the M1A instead of the M21 is pretty simple. The M21 SWS is a variation of the M1A. The M1A is a marksman variation of the legendary M14 rifle, and the M21 is just the military version of the M1A. The SWS is 44 inches long with a 22-inch barrel, just like the M1A, and they're obviously of the same caliber, 7.62 by 51 NATO. The on-set armorers just painted the M1As to make them look more like military-issued M21s with urban camo. The biggest difference between the two is the fact that the M1A was designated for commercial use, while the M21 can also be mounted with a bipod. The M21 entered service during the Vietnam War, but it didn't really see any action until the invasion of Grenada in 1983. Some people argued that Doyle's sniper rifle could be the M24 SWS, which was introduced in 1988 to replace the M21. But the older M21 system is still used in the Army to this day because of just how reliable it is. So it's definitely not an era-inaccurate weapon. Aside from snipers, we also see some soldiers armed with FN Minimes, which stand in for the M249 SAW, which is just the FN Minime variant adopted by the US military. As you can tell, there's a lot of that going on. Weapons being used in place of other weapons because they're borderline identical, but we actually see the SAW on one occasion. A Browning M2HB heavy machine gun makes a few appearances, mostly at checkpoints and mounted on vehicles. Most of the officers, including General Stone and Major Levy, are armed with the Beretta 92 FS. And, of course, we can't forget the flamethrowers. Now, since the US military hasn't used flamethrowers since 1978, one would think that points would be docked for this, but I think we can let this one slide. In a world where zombies took out the entirety of the UK, I imagine the DoD would bring them back just to clean up the streets of London. And it's not like there was ever a Great Fire in London that took days to put out and caused irreparable damage to huge parts of the city, right? On a side note, did you know that you can legally own a flamethrower in the United States? It's considered a tool, not a weapon, so you can legally own a tool deemed too cruel by military standards in all but 2 states. If you know which states banned them, let me know in the comments below. With that in mind, it's appropriate to question how smart it is to use flamethrowers in this situation. If you light the infected on fire, they're going to start running around in panic and they could easily light a house or a building on fire. You're essentially trading one problem, the infected, for another potential problem, a fire. However, the DoD apparently signed off on it in this universe. I guess they decided that the benefits outweigh the risks. Aside from that, the gear used by the Army seems like it's in line with the era. They're all wearing the universal camouflage pattern uniforms, the vehicles are all accurate, there's nothing really wrong with them, aside from their strategy. The loadout is a textbook occupation kit, just not for this textbook. The gun handling in this movie can't be overly criticized since it's fairly accurate, but what can be criticized are the tactics we see on display. There are a few glaring issues that are bound to raise a few eyebrows, starting with the fact that a superintendent has access to restricted military areas. It's explained in the beginning of the movie that the military is keeping all civilians returning to London in buildings as they're cleaning the streets. Don is one of the superintendents taking care of these buildings, and he brags to his kids early on that he has access to everything, literally everything. Everyone watching probably thought, sure Don, whatever you say, but he wasn't lying. That guy actually did have access to restricted areas. When his wife, Alice, is found, the military immediately locks her in a safe room. As Major Scarlett Levy, who is a doctor, quickly establishes, Alice is a carrier of the rage virus, but she's seemingly not developing symptoms as her body is successfully fighting the virus off. She's extremely valuable because of this, as her blood might be key to finding a vaccine or even curing the infected. Don, who thought Alice was dead, wants to visit her and he just walks in. He uses his security clearance to get into the med lab. Is this movie trying to tell us that a civilian superintendent has clearance to a highly secure military infirmary and med lab? There are no words to explain how unrealistic this is. I think people who bought blockbuster stocks have a higher likelihood of returning their investment than Don does at his clearance getting into that room. The United States military have decades of experience of working with civilians, and there's no chance in hell they'd give a civilian worker the one clearance to rule them all. On top of that, if this woman is so valuable, why aren't there armed guards in the lab? Shouldn't securing her be priority number 1? And this is an issue we see on a few other occasions, as Andy and Tammy are left in isolation without a single guard. Maybe the biggest sin, however, is the fact that snipers on Overwatch don't have their own security teams. Although snipers can operate alone, they're most often seen working in pairs, a sniper and a spotter. Both the designated sniper and the spotter are trained in both sniping and spotting, and the duty of a spotter can also be to hold security for the sniper in case the sniper doesn't need him at the moment. In some cases, snipers work without a spotter, usually when the targets are so close that a spotter would be surplus to requirements, but they'll still have at least one person holding security for them. A movie that paid special attention to this is American Sniper, where Chris Kyle is seen with his own security detail. It's extremely rare to see a sniper provide overwatch with his back exposed, but that's exactly what we see in 28 Weeks Later. The logic behind this decision can somewhat be understood. They're expecting very little combat, possibly none of it, and putting a man on a rooftop to watch a sniper's back means you're taking him off another job. Despite that, leaving a sniper unprotected is still risky, and I don't want to hear the "maybe they didn't have enough men" argument. They have the entirety of London at their disposal. The army could have moved a few thousand additional troops if it wanted to. However, they decided against it, and this turns around to bite them later on as they're overwhelmed and taken down by the infected. The command is entirely at fault for this containment breach because they're the ones who greenlit issuing a random civilian a clearance pass that can get him anywhere. The command is also at fault for that terrible crowd control plan. When Dan starts running around infecting everyone, panic breaks out and a stampede of people and the infected barrels down the main avenue of the so far secure zone. General Stone changes the rules of engagement on the fly and tells the snipers to shoot everyone in the streets, doesn't matter if they're infected or not. Obviously, this is a huge ethical dilemma. If you only shoot the infected, it will take longer to take the ball down as the snipers need to identify the infected. On the other hand, if you indiscriminately open fire on everyone in the street, you're saving time, but you're also shooting a bunch of innocent civilians. Rules of engagement are, as the name implies, military rules that clearly outline when can the military force engage and whom they are allowed to engage. You're going to hear the term rules of engagement or the acronym ROE thrown around a lot in military movies, and that's fairly realistic. ROE is incredibly important in combat as it prevents unnecessary casualties. In fact, soldiers even get a card with the ROE listed and broken down in it when deploying. Depending on the situation, soldiers may only be allowed to fire if they're fired upon, only fire if they have positive identification, they may be allowed or disallowed from attacking enemy infrastructure, and in some cases, everyone can be declared hostile. This is one of those situations. The command understands that the rage virus is extremely easy to spread. Although it's not airborne, all it takes is a single drop of blood or saliva to infect a healthy individual. Therefore, they see everyone, even healthy civilians, as potential targets, and they declare everyone hostile. As we know, this is the reason Doyle leaves his post. He has Andy, a preteen boy, in his sight, and he refuses to open fire because he doesn't want to shoot a child.
When we are separated, I thought I lost you too.
This is something that I feel the army should have seen coming. You can't expect that your soldiers will gladly open fire on civilians, especially not the civilians that they see every day, share lunch with them, and spend time with. This is something that the movie could have and maybe should have made a bigger deal out of. The soldiers are ordered to shoot civilians, and although it's implied that they have some issues with the order, this is never really broken down in the movie, and I think it would make a far better watch if we got to see more of a moral dilemma here. This is something that struck me as weird when watching this movie. The rooftops are filled with snipers, but there are just a few soldiers with machine guns. Machine guns are designed to mow down large masses, and if you find yourself in a situation where you have to protect yourself from a mass of hostiles, saws are surely a better solution than a few dozen sniper rifles. Snipers have a much lower rate of fire, and no matter who's behind the trigger, they weren't designed to take out hundreds of combatants in a short period of time. On top of that, it's very difficult to aim at a moving target with optics, especially when that moving target is sprinting. If the army had set up more than 3 machine gun positions, which is how many we see in the movie, and gave the shoot everyone on sight order, they would have a really good shot at nipping the outbreak in the bud. The final tactical issue we have to criticize is the staggering lack of communication between troops, but I'll specifically focus on Sergeant Doyle and Major Levy. When Doyle bumps into Levy with a few other civilians, neither of them thinks of contacting HQ and telling them that they need extraction. Sure, Levy does explain that the Army's contingency plan in case of a breakout is total extermination of everyone found in the streets, but surely they'd be willing to come up with an extraction plan if they're contacted by a high-ranking officer and a Delta NCO, right? I find it really hard to imagine that they'd tell an officer and an elite operative to rot and die. Is Major Levy that afraid of General Stone? Does this lack of trust stem from the fact that Stone wanted to kill Alice when they found her?
We need to run some tests.
Run tests on a corpse, Major.
Is it because of this that Levy doesn't even want to try getting evacuated, but instead immediately commits to an escape plan?
I am aware of the effect I have on women.
All in all, the lack of guard posts in crucial areas, the clearances given to civilians, the isolated snipers, actually, the completely mispurposed use of snipers, all of those things make this occupation one of the most poorly planned ones in US Army's make-believe history. With such a poorly planned contingency plan, it's not odd that the infected overwhelmed and controlled areas in a matter of hours. Unlike most other zombies, the infected in the 28 Days Later universe are fast, relentless, and they have borderline infinite stamina. They also seemingly have a semblance of reason in them, as they're capable of opening doors and ambushing humans, which is something Don does several times throughout the movie. Also, Don is capable of using his access card even after turning into a zombie. This isn't something we don't see in the movie, but it's implied because you need an access card to leave the infirmary, and that pretty much makes Don the smartest zombie in history. Since the communication between the units is so poor, General Stone quickly greenlights a firebombing plan. The logic behind the firebombing is sound. It will destroy everything and burn everyone in the area, both the zombies and the humans. The issue I have with it is the fact that the army bombs its own troops. Just minutes before the firebombing, we see Doyle, Major Levy, and a few civilians get pinned down by a sniper. The sniper, following the shoot everyone on sight orders, opens fire on them, and we can only assume that he's not the only soldier in the area. By the way, this very sniper is behind one of the funniest lines in the movie, as Doyle says that he's a panicker, no marksman, just a moment after the sniper shoots a 3-inch mirror Doyle uses to take a look behind a corner. He says that because the sniper took multiple shots and got just one hit. Doyle, brother, the guy was shooting at a half-palm-sized object, in the dark, a few hundred feet away. If anything, making that shot makes him a great marksman. Anyway, Doyle shoots the sniper, which is treason, by the way, and the group manages to escape the area just as the firebombing starts. The elephant-sized question in the room is, did the army just firebomb their own troops? There has to be some healthy and armed soldiers in the area, surely General Stone knows that, but he just willingly killed his own men just to contain the virus. The infected had the advantage here because the army brought guns to a biology fight, and it went exactly how you'd expect. As long as a single infected person is alive, there's a chance the virus will spread. Firepower is not effective against chaos without control. For example, there's an entire group of infected that left the firebombing area. We see them in Regent Park, where Doyle and the survivors were supposed to be extracted by Flynn, the helicopter pilot. Apparently, nobody in the army even knows that the infected are there, and that is until Flynn spots them on the way to Doyle and literally mows them down with the blades of his hatred copter. By the way, Flynn's helicopter is an Airbus H-125, also known as the A-Star, and while that bird is in use by many police departments in the States, it's definitely not part of the US Army's inventory. Speaking of helicopters, we generally don't see any recon flights above London. The army isn't even trying to find out whether there are any infected that survived the firebombing, nor are they putting troops on the ground to establish control. We later see gas released, followed by flamethrower troops, but that's the very end of the movie. All of this to say that it didn't take the infected too much to survive the army's extermination attempts, and as we know, the movie ends with the infection reaching Europe's mainland, specifically Paris, implying that it spreads all over the world. With all of that in mind, this movie really doesn't commit too many sins in terms of the firearms and the gear seen in the movie. The gear sells the realism, and we get a very real sense of what an American occupation of London would look like in case the city ever got overrun with zombies. In function, the gear, no matter how accurate it is, collapses instantly. If only looking tactical made you tactical, right? The army in this movie is way out of its depth, and the decisions made by the commanding officers are shockingly poor. You can't blame the soldiers for the security officer issuing an all-zone clearance to a civilian. You also can't blame the soldiers for leaving a carrier of the infection alone in the infirmary. They're not the decision makers. You can't blame the snipers for being unable to handle a horde of D1 track athletes because it's the officers' fault they sent snipers to do machine gunners' jobs. Finally, you can't blame anyone but the officers for the decision to bomb the hell out of the no longer secure district without any control over the area. The only real part of this movie is in the gear, but the horror is in the execution. Although officers aren't faultless, and if anything, they're usually at fault for operations going sideways, it's really difficult to suspend our disbelief throughout the length of the movie to justify the long line of bad decisions made here. It's like the officers in this universe always ask themselves, what's the worst possible decision I could make in this situation? And they follow that mantra to a T. Because of this, I'm certain that actual military personnel had a really tough time watching this movie. The decision making is abhorrent and it quickly makes you lose all sense of realism. We're going to grade 28 Weeks Later in 2 different categories. As for gear and firearms realism, which includes gun handling, it gets a solid 8 out of 10. All of the weapons, as well as the vehicles, uniforms, and other gear are era accurate for 2003, which is when this movie is supposed to take place. The only unrealistic weapon in the entire movie is the Flamethrower, but as we discussed before, flamethrowers aren't really banned. The DoD is just refusing to use them, and that can change at any moment if faced with a threat that justifies it. There are only 2 noticeable gun-related mistakes in the entire movie. One of them being the fact that Doyle uses his night vision scope during the day, and on another occasion we see him using his holographic sights, but they don't show when we cut to his point of view. Aside from this, there isn't anything we can fault this movie for. Sure, they used the Mini-Me instead of the Saw, and they used the M1A instead of the SWS, but these weapons are members of the same family and they're borderline identical, so they don't really affect this movie negatively. What does affect the movie negatively is the decision making. Watching this movie was pretty infuriating because of the Army's ineptitude. It actually made it difficult to focus on the weapons. The Army gets a 0 out of 10, as they did everything in their power to make this movie happen. Giving civilians access to restricted areas, leaving infected persons unguarded, positioning snipers in machine gunners' places, firebombing without following up with recon flights and close control. They did everything in their power to make this mini-apocalypse happen. What did you think of 28 Weeks Later? Did you see 28 Years Later? And which movie do you want to see broken down next? Let us know in the comments below and make sure to subscribe for more breakdowns.